It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today we have a two-topic hodgepodge. We are going to talk a lot about boxing and TKO, and we're going to talk a lot about the Global Fight League and their possible demise. And we have some bonus material as well, some extra bonus material about UFC 314. And then we even have a super-duper supercalifragilisticexpialidocious bonus question as well. So there's lots of content today. And if you're smart, you'll subscribe so you have access to all of that bonus content. Now let's check in with John and see how his week has been.
Well, my week has been fine. Today, though, it's extremely windy out here. I'm still in Minnesota, and it looks like a Twister's coming on TM.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know if there is, but it is windy. I don't know if there's a Twister, but man, it is windy. I feel like the house might blow away.
You know, in California, they woke up to an earthquake today, so you should consider yourself lucky, or you might have been shaken to your core.
That was in San Diego, the earthquake, which is a little further south where I am. So I'm not, but yeah, it's earthquakes are pretty common in California.
Yes.
I'm still waiting for the big one, though.
But you would have been shaken to your core.
Oh, yeah.
No earthquakes in California, all those little baby ones where everybody races over to social media to say, did you feel it?
Yeah, I sleep through most of those, and I don't really feel them because I can't tell the difference between them and a giant freaking delivery truck going by outside.
Well, yeah, that tells you about California earthquakes, but never, ever get too comfortable because, you know, that San Andreas fault line is just prime for the big one.
Don't be jinxing me.
I'm knocking wood right now. Knocking wood.
Yeah, I got my supplies. I'm all ready.
All right. So I guess we should go ahead and get started here. And we're going to lead off with GFL stuff because on Friday, GFL sent out a press release stating that they would grant the release of any fighter that requested it. Is this the end of GFL in your opinion?
I mean, is it the end? Maybe GFL was really the friends we made along the way. I mean, no, honestly, I do think this is one is I don't know how they would even ever hold an event in California again, right? That's one. Two is you don't know who's going to trust to sign up with them because they made a lot of promises. They have they're pitching this, we're doing this league, air quotes again on the league, for all these older fighters, best purses they've had, if not ever, at least in years they've had. So who's going to have confidence it's going to happen this time in the future now that you canceled? Who's going to, everything seemed too good to be true, and it does seem too good to be true. So I think it's unlikely if the financiers, as he said, dropped out. Well, after such a bad PR cycle, who's going to now finance this promotion or league? So yes, it is. I do believe this is the end of GFL. I mean, I shouldn't say complete. Maybe they'll do some minor shows somewhere that no one really cares about, but it's not going to be this big entity or even a fraction of that they claimed it was going to be.
Is there anything they could have done to avoid this catastrophe?
I mean, not make so many proclamations. No, I'm thinking about it. I don't know if there was, because their whole point at the beginning is their whole launch was we were going to be a major promotion, right? A major promotion. We're going to sign older fighters that have social media. But again, that ignores the fact that just because fighters are people who know who the fighters are, there's not interest anymore if they're way over the hill, if they've lost a ton of fights. People like, relevant fights. People try to argue with me all the time, but the evidence we have is that people want important, relevant fights. Now, it's better if they know who the fighters are, if they're attached to them, but that's the key. They didn't have that. they had no financial structure to really to get these people to sign on. They were offering all this money, but that was truly overpaying these fighters the value they were bringing. They had, the whole long list of stuff they didn't have to avoid the catastrophe. They didn't have the financing. They didn't have the broadcast deal. So to avoid the catastrophe, the first step should have been that they should have the financing in place before they do any of this. And then also before they get to the next step is get some sort of broadcast deal before they start announcing or any sort of sponsorship deal, any sort of financial revenue stream before they start announcing events. They didn't do any of that. And that kind of gives it away, as we said before. I think this was kind of it always was a fake it until you make it promotion by Darren Owens, is that he was trying to put forward that this was going to happen and then get the money afterwards, and it just didn't work. So what would have avoided this catastrophe? I guess making sure you had the finances in place first, but the finances never would have been in place first because, no one would have believed this is going to take place anyways.
Okay, I have a side question before I move on to our regular question. I'm just wondering if any of the fighters have grounds for a lawsuit here. If anybody felt like getting litigious, could they?
I would have to look through all the contracts. I haven't seen them, but we saw several of the contracts, and there were so many loopholes. It's almost impossible to imagine how you could file a suit. So I don't think there's any room for a lawsuit based on what I saw on those contracts. The only ones I could say, if there was some fighters supposedly got per diems or salaries, and I haven't seen those contracts yet, but if there was some sort of commitment for payment for a certain amount of time, they might have a suit. But the contracts we saw was, you didn't even you signed a deal. It wasn't even guaranteed you'd get a contract. They had the option not to draft you, and then your contract was void. There's nothing that guarantees you got a fight. And so if there's no guarantee you have a fight, I don't know what you sue, because how do you have damages if there's no guarantee in your contract that you have a fight?
Okay. There was something so wild. I couldn't even believe it when you sent it to me. But what about this idea that they had where the fighters would waive their guaranteed purses for a nonprofit event and then split up whatever the profits that they made? I'm sorry, it made me laugh so hard when you sent it.
Yeah, it was. They were getting fighters and management, and everybody was getting calls, and they were making a pitch that they're going to do this nonprofit. All the revenue, all the profits would be split amongst the fighters. They would not get a guaranteed purse. And right then you knew that was dead on arrival, because one of the appeals of this promotion was the guaranteed purse. The other thing was funny is, I guess they were telling people, a lot of people are talking to, that a lot of other fighters were already committed to doing this. I'm like, really? Are they really committed to doing this? I find it hard to believe that people, that a lot of people have signed on to this idea already. But the whole point was, what made it seem just insane to me is you're offering fighters way above scale, just large. The top guys were getting like $1 million contracts, $800,000 contracts. Other fighters, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. Lesser known guys in the bottom, $50,000. But you're talking about fighters that from the UFC were getting often twice what they were getting during their prime in the UFC. So just multiple millions on this an event would happen. They're asking these guys, okay, give up the guaranteed and we'll give you a percentage. And you're like, well, the previous contract said that I would get my guarantee, and if we crossed a certain threshold because of the wage share plan that they had, I would also get a percentage. So you're asking me to basically go back to getting a percentage, but also no guarantee. This is, what a terrible step down. And if you can't even hold the original event, why can I trust that you generate these kind of revenues that your projections are that I'd make? So I think if anything put a nail in the coffin of GFL, it wasn't just the event got postponed, air quotes there. It's then they almost in desperation reached out to fighters to hold this nonprofit event. And then, it's like, well, this does not sound anything like you're originally pitching. This is not going to fill me with confidence that you're going to hold the events, or I'm going to even get paid if I do the event. So that was my thoughts, that if anything killed GFL, I think it was them trying to put on a nonprofit afterwards.
Now, you got sent an Excel page that GFL was using to try to convince those fighters to compete on this nonprofit. Tell everybody how unrealistic that Excel page was.
Well, it was. I shared it with you. It's fairly insane. I believe Fight Oracle also got it, and I was saving it for the show, so we got scooped on that. But but he had it. I think, I don't know if he posted it or not. I think he just shared some of the information on it, or I don't know if he got it or he was told about it. But anyways, they go through it. They go through all the production costs, which the total, they break down all the different various production costs and say that's going to cost $1.3 million. Then they go through all the projected revenues. And the projected revenues, okay, one is we don't know what fighters have signed on yet. And so they have projected ticket sales on 8,000 seats, I believe it is, from a low of 800,000 to a high of 1.2 million. Well, that's, outside the UFC, that's a very good gate. How are you going to generate that gate when we don't even know what fighters are going to be on this yet? If you're asking me to sign on as a fighter, I would imagine I'd need to know who's on it to make any sort of projection. On top of that, the pay-per-view media rights were tremendous, from a low of 3 million to a high of 7 million. And, we're like, well, if we don't have the pay-per-views are really hard to sell. None of the fights we're putting together are pay-per-view quality fights. And we have no broadcast partners. So again, where's that money going to come from? Then sponsorship, again, from 1 million to 2 million was their range. Merchandise, I thought the most absurd. The low of merchandise was 250,000. That's a very good UFC event that does 250,000. The high was 1 million. I am not certain. I think one UFC event has ever reached 1 million in merchandise. And I'm not even sure if it ever did that, but that's would be the top end of a UFC event. Otherwise, their other top ones for years were like 500,000. So that's an absurd level of merchandise. So they put that all together, and you're looking at a revenue of 5 million to 11 million or so. Does not seem realistic. And then they tell the fighters, well, after the expenses, we'll split it. And they have a breakdown. The top fighters would each get 15%. The next 10% go down the line. And then the guys at the very bottom would get 0.5%. So fighters would be looking, the 1% guys revenue share to get a minimum of 37,500 based on the low revenue. But my opinion would be much lower than that. And then at the high, they'd be getting like 99,000. And then the top guy would be getting anywhere from 562,500 to 1,485,000. But again, I think those numbers are tremendously unrealistic. So you're talking about guys that probably signed a contract originally that would pay them up to $1 million in GFL. And now they're at the low end, they're being promised 562,500, lower than that when they were signed for. But also, you have no expectation to ever reach that. So you'd be coming on the assumption that you might get a fraction of what you agreed to. So it was absurd. Let's just put it that way. That's the nicest way for me to phrase it.
All right. So we're going to switch gears here, and we're going to move into UFC and TKO territory. But oddly enough, this question starts with Don Davis. He has been busy again over on LinkedIn, and he made a post about broadcast rights for UFC and PFL. What's the big takeaway from that post he made?
Well, I think he's right about one thing. A big takeaway is that the UFC is going to get probably a large broadcast deal. But the takeaway he tries to insert is that the next question that everybody's going to be asking is where PFL goes. And I'm not certain anybody will be asking that question. He's trying to set it up. Again, he is appealing on LinkedIn. He likes LinkedIn. He's appealing to people that are not in the fight business, not us fans. People in business, people that potentially they might deal with sponsorship or broadcasting, investment, or just the general in business class of people. But he's trying to sell everybody that yes, the PFL is not UFC, but we're the next thing. And so the bigger the UFC numbers gets, the PFL is going to get a big number too. And that way, they can, people are like, oh, the PFL's on the rise. I should, we can get them maybe we should be a sponsor for them. They're on the rise. They're going to get this big deal. or we should invest in them. All these possibilities that he's always on they're on the search for. But the truth is, we talked about last week, their numbers and the interest level you just see in the general MMA fans. And actually, I should example this. When Pitbull appeared at UFC 314, right? 5 years ago, I think there would have been a tremendous reaction to Pitbull.
Yes.
Patricio Pitbull showing up at a UFC event. Tremendous. The fan base would have been aware of him. They would have been excited. The current fan base, fan base has always been UFC centric for UFC events, but much more now than they've ever been. Much more less knowledgeable about other promotions. And also the other promotions have much less impact on the market than they did before. So, I mean, I wouldn't say I was shocked, but I was disappointed how muted the reaction was. I'm like, I do not think 5 years ago we would have got that reaction.
Right.
I remember when Gilbert Melendez showed up. I mean, it's his hometown in San Jose when he showed up in the UFC and there was a tremendous reaction from the crowd there. So same when, Dan Henderson's a little different. Everybody in the UFC was aware of him, but there was select fighters showed up at UFC events from Strikeforce. There was a reaction. We didn't have that at all with the Patricio, which was sad, but it shows the current climate. And I think with PFL, you have the problem now is they're having less and less star power on their roster. There's apparently less and less interest. What's to make us think that the deciding factor in the future of streaming is where the UFC and then PFL signs? So I give him credit for trying to shape this question that way, but I don't think it's based in any reality.
He's basically including himself in the same room at the same table with UFC, like there's any kind of level playing field there, right?
Yeah, in some ways it's like if, the Yankees sold for $8 billion. Well, I own the Minnesota Twins, a smaller team, or Kansas City. We're not as valuable as the Yankees. But we are another properties available. So if you want to buy it for $2 billion, we're available. You're not in the same league, though. You're not in the major leagues. It's sad as it is to say, you just don't have that reach. And it's, but that's, kind of what he's trying to do. And that's kind of a fake it till you make it. But I just don't see the end goal of actually making it to the level that they think they will. I think we're already seeing there looks like there might be the bottom falling out on these streaming services, on linear TV. Do they have the money that would make it worthwhile? I mean, I'm sure they'll get offers, but I'm also sure they were thinking like $100 million plus TV deal offer in the future was what would make PFL a property that's worthwhile. I don't know if that kind of money, anything close to that kind of money will be out there. We'll have to wait and see, but I just do not see it right now.
Okay. I am going to reorder our questions. So I'm going to throw you off here, John, but I just realized that I didn't order them properly. Excuse me. So
that's fine. I don't look at the questions while you're doing them. So.
Okay, great. Okay. At UFC 314, all of the heavy hitters from Trump's cabinet were in attendance. People on social media are pondering if the UFC might be pushing the envelope a little bit too far with all the political propaganda. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I've seen a lot of reaction actually on Twitter lately. A lot of, and I've noticed that there's always been a turnover, but there seems to be a lot of fans on social media. Maybe it's because I interact more with them because they're older fans that do not like the UFC anymore. I know it's Ryan McKinnell from Sirius XM. He's no longer with them, but he denounced almost like an Ivan Trembone. People remember that name from years ago. Announcement where he was quitting, combat sports. He announced that he's no longer wants anything to do with MMA and the UFC specifically. I've seen this a lot. Luke Thomas says all the time. He gets emails every week about people are just done with the UFC. Co-main event talks about the same thing. There is a lot of people turned off by this, but at the same time, they seem to be drawing a lot of fans in. So I'm not quite certain. You'd think there would be some blowback eventually because, the country's evenly split, and there is a chance, too, the way Trump administration is operating, that their approval rating will go down. And so you wouldn't want to like piss off a large portion of the country because you want to make, you don't want to make it like our sport, our promotions only for one political party. The other thing I'm looking forward to is UFC 315 in Canada, because Americans might not be aware of this, but Canadians are not happy with our country, and with good reason, because of the tariffs that seem to be targeting them specifically, with the threats to annex them and make them the 51st state. We might laugh at that, but they take it serious because it seems like it's serious. And in Europe, we see the same thing. In Japan, there's just been a decline, just an incredible decline in the approval, in the view of the United States. I think the majority of the public views, if not the United States, I think the administration is an enemy of theirs. Those are just terrible numbers. And so I'm waiting to see if we see any blowback to the UFC, because they've embraced Trump so much, and Trump is so unpopular in these places. I think I'm interested to see how much blowback happens in those places, because it's possible that they get no blowback because either the fan base separates the UFC from Trump, even though the UFC embraces him so much and is, the Republican Party. Or I guess I shouldn't say they embrace the Republican Party. They embrace the people around Trump. And so one is we'll see if they separate them, or two, that the people that like MMA are just the type of people that kind of like the Trump and MAGA. So I'm curious to see what happens, but I think the first test might be what happens in Canada with UFC 315.
Now, at the UFC 314 post-fight presser, Dana said he would be open to removing their pay-per-view model and following the guidance of their broadcast partner. So what does that tell us? To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!